I was just out tweeting some reminders and a couple of Facebook reminders too. If you've got friends and feel so moved, you might want to do the same thing. We have had a wonderful week of learning for the first ever virtual Virginia conference. It is a partnership of North Tier and VSTE, and we focus this year on this particular week on creating learning spaces for kids. The archive recordings are up now for Monday through Friday. We'll get this one up as soon as we can, but we are really excited today to end with someone that I've had the privilege of knowing and working with for a very long time. I'm never quite get his title right in Henrico County, but at one point I heard that you were the Director of Innovation, Tom, so you can tell us if that's true or not. But Tom's done lots of different things in his career. He's had his foot in higher ed. Now he has his foot in K-12 in Henrico County. And he always has interesting and provocative things to say. I think his point of view on the world helps us all think a little bit differently about the way we come into the world as well. And so we're so excited to welcome him. He does work in Henrico County. He is also a member of the VSTE Board of Directors, and we're thrilled to have him in that position as well. And I'm excited to hear what he has to say today.
Thank you, Karen and Tim. We'll be fairly informal here, so you know, I don't want anyone to hesitate to throw some questions in the chat bar, or it looks like there's few enough of us around that, you know, we could share the mic and whatnot. I am the, for clarity, Karen, I guess I am the Assistant Director for Instructional Technology in the Department of Organizational Development, Quality, and Innovation. At least I was before the latest reorganization. So everything's always in flux. What I want to try and do here today is a little bit multifaceted. Yeah. I want to start with really questioning how we're using technology and what we're kind of claiming as innovative and interesting in education, and then move on to some things that maybe are causing some of this confusion, and then at the end we'll look at some thriving online communities and spaces that are doing the stuff that I think we want to do and doing it well, and maybe look at some of the pieces that are enabling them to do that. So I thought we'd start with the current golden boy of online technology education. That's the Khan Academy guy. K-H-A-N-C-O-N. I don't know which way that falls in your opinion, but what I find kind of ironic about all this is he's being hailed as kind of a reinventor of education, you know, and I kind of got a Google snapshot there in the left-hand corner of some titles there, right? Revolution, changing the rules of education, all that sort of stuff. And you'll see he's wildly popular, you know, 1,400, 3,200 shares there in the social media sidebar. And yet, when you look back a little bit historically without any effort, here is digital video and education. And you can see from those client machines, it's just a snapshot from a paper from 1999, right? Yeah, Karen's mentioning the QR code revolution as well. We just have to be really careful, because you know, the media is certainly running away with what revolutionizes education, and it's kind of sad to me that these things, one, have been going on for a long time, and we're kind of portraying them as new every so often. Right, every 6 months. I agree with Tim there. But in many cases, they've either been kind of established things that we understand, and we have some research and things about, and when it's effective and when it isn't, and really kind of a little bit more about the boundaries. And each time we get so excited about, you know, using video to teach people, we have to really think a lot about what that means. This is one that's kind of a little more, I don't know, heartfelt, but I think equally, you know, coming from a strange place. So this is, I want to make sure I get his name right. Sugata Mitra, right, who did the hole in the wall. Essentially, he put a laptop, made it available with high-speed internet to some kids in slums, essentially, in India. And, you know, this is just a quote from somebody else. Without any supervision, unanticipated evidence about the high intelligence and capacity of illiterate children to acquire, you know, knowledge, essentially, without the help of teachers. That was good and bad in certain ways to me. I think, you know, I don't think that these three certainly would be surprised that kids could learn on their own in a fairly constructivist setting. But it goes back to that root of how do we feel about kids and what do we really expect them to do without an adult to tell them exactly the right path to take or how to learn something. It seems like, you know, people learn to speak, people learn to walk, people learn to do a lot of complex and sophisticated things without a lot of direct instruction. So it's worth thinking about these things, you know, even when they're kind of fit within our mindset. Like, I like that idea of giving kids access to computers, but, you know, I think it's important to keep looking back at it and going like, really, are we reinventing something? Are we discovering something? Or are we just, you know, we look back every once in a while and act really surprised by things that we probably should have known and be building our organizations around. Tim, I see there with Alfie Kahn's mentions, you know, I think these people are really have said a lot of things that we keep reinventing and refining in a way that I think robs momentum and is a little bit depressing. You know, if we have no knowledge of our history as educators, it's really hard to make progress. So, ephobophobia. Anyone want to guess what that means? No guesses in the sidebar? Yeah, fear of something. It's a fear of kids, essentially, fear of the young. And I think it's particularly pertinent in today's world. You know, you have all this, what is it with youth today, that kind of thing going on in a way that's really depressing. And I think it is part of the mix here. This site I found a while back, I'll throw in the sidebar, you know, that just kind of tries to catalog, you know, quotes about the world ending because of the youth and how they're not respectful, etc., just over time, everyone from Egypt onward. And it's just, you know, we aren't really in a unique place in time in terms of what our youth is, I don't think. And I didn't vet every quote there, but I did look up a number of them to see if they were right and true, and it seems like they're pretty accurate. And Karen asks in the sidebar, why didn't Montessori take off? And assembly line education did. I think, you know, it comes down to this piece that I'm about to lead with. It's really about process and the lowest common denominator. I think we treat kids in a really weird way. We give them the turtle here on the left, the highly processed, cartoonized version that kids like, quote unquote like. Whereas, you know, I think the world is much more like the turtle on the right that we just caught actually this summer near my house. You know, the turtle on the left has hair, which really depressed me. You know, it's just wrong in every way, and yet that's the kind of content we give kids because that's what they can handle. You know, whereas that is one of my children holding that turtle, and that led to all sorts of really interesting and fascinating things. And I realize we can't take every kid down to the lake and catch turtles, right? Nope, didn't rip its legs off, didn't kill it. We did not die of salmonella poisoning or anything like that. No one drowned in the pond. You know, all those fears that would come up if you tried to do something like that in public ed, you know, just it doesn't happen on a regular basis. And yet we build these huge constructs around that worst case scenario. And this isn't even in a particularly natural place. It's near a golf course pond. you know, here was another example that just led to some beautiful stuff. That is a hickory horned devil, which I could not have told you before we found it at Maymont. I would have thought that was from the Amazon. And the kind of things finding that caterpillar kicked off for my kids and me, like I had to look it up because I was nervous, a little bit nervous that it was poisonous, right? There are some caterpillars that will certainly make you very uncomfortable. But, you know, having this out there and being able to capture it, and that's another point, Cheryl, is you can capture this stuff. And I think that's one of the fascinating things about technology. You can bring chunks of the real world in, even when you can't bring the real world, you know, the kids to the real world. But we don't do that so often. We give them this homogenized, here, this is for education, it's on the right reading level, you know, it's just what you can take. I don't want to, you know, have a word in there you might not understand or show you something that isn't polished that might lead to the wrong conclusion, you know, whereas I think we do want a big chunk of raw material showing what the real world is like in a way that may be a little bit beyond some people who are consuming the media. Yeah. It is messy. I think Karen's right there. And I think messy is good. When we chop off all the limbs that stick off, you know, I think we end up with something that isn't what it once was. And the kids do want messiness, and they enjoy kind of making sense of it. So I play around with trying to delineate exactly what technology really gets us there. And I try and make it sound like higher ed by saying affordances instead of good stuff. I think those things matter, and there are things that technology really helps us do, but I think very often we don't take advantage of these things. We see the technology, we don't see the capabilities it enables. And I think a lot of this is based on the fear of teachers, right? Pedagophobia. Is that we as a culture and a lot of school systems, we don't trust teachers. We have a lot of fear that that bottom line teacher won't do enough. And then we build systems around that. This was something I took from, I'll throw the link up in here. This is from a Netflix presentation from about 3 or 4 years ago on how they do their HR, which I found absolutely fascinating at the time, and it has become more and more important to me. I think that starts on slide about 45. But the basic idea is this, and I'll be curious, I'll stop after I explain it to you and see how true it is for you, is that a lot of good organizations start over there on the left without a lot of rules and procedures and processes because they have a high percentage of really high-performing employees. And then the organizational size and complexity is kind of low. It's you know, if I was to make it a school, think small private school or small community school where most of the teachers know each other, they know the superintendent, the vision is set, the communication is had at a one-to-one level, and things just work. But as things get bigger, and the number of super awesome high-level people engaged in knowing each other declines, you get this red part, right, where problems start to occur and people kind of freak out. And so what's the response to, oh no, we can't do this? You implement processes, right? This is how you do it. This is when you cover this topic. This is how long you spend. I think you see a huge amount of this process type of implementation across the United States right now. And it does bring you back to something that's working. You know, in companies, they're like, it's time to grow up. I think in education, you see it as, hey, it's time to be more like a business. We need to do database decision making. We need to standardize this because we can't really, we know we have some great teachers, but we have a lot of teachers we can't guarantee their quality, so we need to tell them exactly what to do. And I think that's the key, is it's an explicit telling that isn't focused around getting people better, but rather telling them what to do. And that drives even more high-performing employees out because they don't want to just follow directions. And I worry this is kind of the place we're at, where we are getting some bumps in SOL scores or, you know, Common Core or whatever. You can maintain this type of organization with lower skilled employees, right? You don't need master teachers if you have the master teachers design kind of the step-by-step piece. And then what I fear happens is that a core value for the place in leadership, in teachers, is that they kind of obey these rules and follow these directions. So this is where I fear we are nationally, is that we've implemented a huge number of processes around this lowest common denominator, and they're processes that tell you what to do, not why to do it. They don't increase understanding at scale, and that what's going to happen is that each time we have a new challenge or a tweak on an old challenge, you have to implement a new process because the people follow directions. They don't understand so often where they are or why they're doing what they're doing. And then culturally within, we've driven out a lot of these high-performing people who would be kind of setting the next bar and, you know, helping people think through this because they don't want to work in a place where they're told what to do every day or what to say. So I see this nationally, I think, but I'm curious if you see it happening in your district and to what extent. Do the processes in place help people, or do they tell them what to do?
So are you actually asking us, because if I can just jump in here, man, Tom, I can't keep my mouth shut when I listen to you. I have the really simple example of it. I worked at a great little tiny middle school in Middlesex County. It was 6th and 7th graders. There were only 2 grades. The faculty had worked together for a really long time. I'm not going to say they were the most innovative people in America, but they really cared about the kids. They taught hard. They learned hard. They did fun stuff with them. We went canoeing on the river and all sorts of stuff. We just, because it was small, we could do things. And every afternoon, everybody, all the teachers sort of got together in the little old auditorium and stood in a circle and kind of talked about their days, and there was lots of interaction. They built a new building. It was gorgeous. They brought in 8th grade, and they went with the philosophy that says that kids in middle school need to be in silos, that they're not mature enough, so 6th graders really need to be in themselves, 7th graders need to be alone, and they really were. They didn't see each other throughout the day. They might pass in the hallway, but everything, and you know what happened? The teachers lost that. They only spoke to their grade level because you couldn't leave the wing at the end of the day to get out with the other teachers because you had to guard those particular kids. And you lost that cross-grade conversation. You really lost the whole sense of the school. It became much more grade-level focused that you were an 8th grade teacher. And it was one of those things where we were trying to move into the 21st century, and the organization got bigger, and we lost something really powerful when that happened.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me, Karen, is I feel like it's kind of like unified string theory or something like that. You know, it's something that feels really right to me and seems to explain a couple different scales of problems. Because I see it happen at like a district level and often at a school level, but you also see kind of a mirror of this in the classroom where we teach people a process for solving a math problem, or you follow the directions on a science project, but you don't actually learn or understand what you're doing. And then we kind of wonder why this is occurring at a couple different scales, and I think because it's occurring at a couple different scales. Becky, were you going to say something? Nope, she dropped out. But it just, it seems to explain so much. It explains like why really high-performing students often check out. They're not really interested in being told what to do. You know, we have this huge teacher turnover. We wonder why. I think this explains a lot of it, and it really is about how we approach this. Do I think that there are processes and kind of standards that we need to have? Yeah. But I think they need to be really, really intentional in terms of building understanding, rather than teaching adherence to a process. So if you're going to implement this, like there's a lot that has to go into what are these big things that you can implement. That's another thing that Netflix gets into. It's really worth checking out, I think. But you know, is anybody thinking through this in powerful ways they feel like in their division? Like, I'm kind of curious about you, Becky. Are you doing things like this in Albemarle? No, she may not be around. Anyone else feel like their division is implementing the right number of processes for the right goals? I see Becky writes yes. Yeah, feel free to speak if you'd like, Becky.
Yeah, Tom, we are engaging in actually a strategic planning reset right now. So we've got a kickoff on Monday night that will include some of the community and district key leaders. And all of that is geared towards not measuring our success on state testing and SOL scores. It's geared towards us preparing kids for the world as it will be. So I think, you know,
I think we might have lost her. Well, I mean, I have a hard time, I don't know about y'all, but I have a hard time listing all the initiatives and things that we're doing because I think we are in this second red tier in Henrico, is that we've continued to implement processes, a lot of them really specific, like this is the thing we will do to address this type of deficit, and it's not global, and I'm not always sure that all of our initiatives at scale get at making people better rather than teaching them a process. And so we end up back in this red zone where more and more money, energy, and time goes into process. And so, right, I think Mike's point is if you have too many processes, even if you follow the directions, you know, it's so much to think about that internalizing it and making it stick and matter becomes more and more of an uphill battle.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead, Becky.
So Tom, I'm sorry, my internet connection's a little wonky this morning, so I got kicked off. Was that the kind of thing that you were kind of looking for? How does a division that is on the edge of innovation all the time also manage some strategic processes?
Well, it's kind of a combination of, you know, how are you at the top tier thinking about, if we're going to implement this thing, is it big enough? And in what way is it going to change instruction and be internalized rather than be a compliance type of measure?
Right. So we've got basically a district project board that includes key leaders in the district as well as some principals and other folks. So if I have a project that I want to move forward, it gets evaluated first at our department's level, and then our department person that sits on this strategic planning cabinet basically takes it forward or not. So there's some of our department projects that get managed at the department level, and some of them get kicked up to the project management oversight committee at the division level. So it doesn't keep us from doing what we know we need to be doing, but it does say that, you know, our Power School project, that it obviously involves all kinds of stakeholders and is interdepartmental, that was kicked up to the division level and was managed at the division level, whereas us adding another module to our Blackboard instance stayed at our department's level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, gotcha. So there is definitely some intent in some kind of larger scale conversations, and I think that differs certainly at different school districts, and it feels like, you know, when I've talked to people from the 300,000 student districts, that gets, I don't know, it seems like messier and messier and probably further from a consolidated conversation around changing people versus compliance of the lowest denominator. And in a way, I think that's kind of echoed by the way we do education with students as well. So, you know, I did an aspect of this at VSTE, but I still think that this is pretty true. And that is a very poorly drawn arrow. But, you know, this is kind of how I see, and those of you who don't know, this is a fresco in Italy, I believe. That was in a church. And the one on the left is kind of how I see learning in general, kind of an idealized portrait. And then a lot of times as we institutionalize it, learning ends up looking like this. There's a lot of decay from what we used to have naturally occurring, kind of that hole in the wall thing from earlier. And then what happens is we institute all this other stuff, and instead of getting at, you know, kind of that beautiful natural learning that used to occur, we have this fixed version of it that is a worse atrocity than the decay that we had before. And a lot of times technology integration falls right there in some ways that make me fairly sad. We have patched up the holes, but we've created kind of a monstrosity of a different type. And then we celebrate it at scale, right? And I still argue this quite a bit, is that it doesn't take a whole lot to make this dry dog food seem much better, but we haven't really changed anything fundamentally. It's still dog food. You as a human wouldn't want to eat it. You wouldn't eat it on your own. But in school, where our bar is so low in terms of expectations, people will. They'll choke it down because it is better than that dry dog food on the left. And this was one of the things I keep seeing, is just the sheer amount of celebration between teachers and students when there's a snow day. I'm not saying, you know, that, how do I know what, Becky? That people celebrate? The wet dog food is better. I've tasted it. But, you know, you see this, and it's kind of an expected thing. People are like, wow, kids will be thrilled not to come to school, and so will teachers, you know, and Facebook kind of exacerbates that. But if school is the kind of place that people are so happy when they don't have to go there, you just wonder if that has to be the way it is. You know, I don't think it is. You know, I think of all the different organizations and things that people do that where they work really hard and learn things, yet they would be sad if weather prevented them from going there. And I think that's worth keeping in mind, is we have to keep this bar pretty high. I want to set up the kind of system where people would be sad it was a snow day. And I want to set up the kind of system where people are not feeding students this mechanized dreck, this homogenized pap, you know, because animals aren't meant to eat that. Humans are animals. Let's get them, where's the grass-fed, free-range school that would make a difference? And Karen, that's a good point. Most people feel that their job is sucky and horrible, then we've created kind of a sucky, horrible society. And we need to really think about what's the driver there. Because I think that there are a swath of people who love their jobs and want to participate in them. Right? Yeah, quiet desperation. But that, we should really be thinking about that and what role education plays in kind of setting people up to it. Because I'd argue that's one of the acculturation processes, is that school is miserable, so you're prepared to be miserable in work. And I've heard people justify miserable things in the classroom that way. Your boss isn't going to care if you're happy or not. But look at the really good school or really good companies. They aren't like that. do I really want to, condition a kid to accept misery in the hopes that they will then be more accepting of a miserable job? I don't want that. I want people pursuing their passions in ways that are powerful and then leading on to those passions at work. There's a great comic I'll try and find in a minute and throw in the sidebar there about that. But what I tried to do is find some things online that were happening that were seemingly successful and might be integrated into the idea of how we use technology and community, both online in schools and I think functionally as well. So one of them is big sites like Flickr and other places have community managers. This came up the other day when we had an unconference in Henrico, is that we were talking about trying to figure out ways for ITRTs to communicate and kind of keep in touch. And I listed a bunch of the things VSTE was already doing and other communities that had fallen down. So can I get a indication in the chat bar? Any of you have tried to start online communities or face-to-face communities that have failed? Anyone? So I'm glad I did get some good PR for VSTE's list. Tim, you want to tell me why you think it's working?
Well, it's taken about 5 years and some changes of software, but why it works is primarily because I think our group feels comfortable there. They feel that they can actually come in and change some, to share some ideas and everything. So it's all a matter of, I think, whether or not it's something like this, people feel useful and feel comfortable. And that's the key to a really successful community of any kind. You want to feel like you actually belong there.
Yeah, I think, and part of what does that, and part of what I think is interesting is a lot of times, at least in my experience, we set up the bones, and then we expect, if you build it, they will come. Whereas I think like managing and organizing and making people comfortable in a community and connecting people is something you have to put a lot of energy and time into to make it work. Those of you who know Jim Groom at Mary Washington, that's always what I've felt has been his strongest skill, is how he promotes and connects people and publicizes what they're doing well. That's not something that is inherently natural for everyone, and not everyone's really good at that, but it's one of the places I feel like when we start a new community, we don't have that kind of person or people focusing on making these connections and then maintaining, like Tim notes in the sidebar there, maintaining that energy for a long period of time. You can't like pour a lot of energy into it for 2 weeks and you're done, or a month and then you're done. It's an ongoing addition of energy and time, and that's a very, very important part of making this sort of stuff work. Right. And, what is success? I think that was a good question Karen asked in the sidebar. I made it black and white, like failure, success. We see all sorts of stats around like 80% of people are lurkers, 10%, have this, and only 2% really do anything at scale, or whatever those deals are. What is, and this is the part I struggle with quite a bit, is how do you figure out energy in versus change out? It's an easy thing to say, like if I change one person this day, it was worth it. And I guess like that's an easy thing to say, and we say it all the time. I don't know if it's true. It depends on how much energy and what sort of change. I don't know that you can measure it, but like that matters a lot. But going back to the idea that, I don't know if I'm emphasizing massive, but Karen, in the sidebar here, I'm emphasizing you have to figure out, like, what is it worth? What kind of change do you have to have or be creating to make it worth it? I don't know if it's measurable or not, but if I'm putting in 40 hours a week to change one person, I don't know if that's enough for me. It may be an individual decision, but I think it's one that needs to be taken into account. It's too easy to say, if I change one person, it's worth it. No, it wasn't. You know, if we've got these kids who can pick up all this stuff from a computer that's just wedged in a wall when they couldn't read, then how do we justify the huge amount of organizational effort, time, money, etc., that's poured into public education right now? If they can throw a computer in a hovel in India, you know, essentially, and people achieve X, Y, and Z, we better be achieving just a markedly better scale of progression than that when we do things here with the organization and energy and time that we have. I included this snapshot from Reddit because it's kind of another scale here. So previously we were at Flickr, and I think their community was at least pretty decent, and they've spent a lot of time organizing it. And Reddit's one of those really popular sites, but I thought I'm not a Reddit pro. I thought it was really interesting that they have a whole section called Today I Learned, right? So we kind of come at education very often as if people aren't interested in learning things. But if you look around any place on the internet, people are fascinated with facts and learning, and they want to do stuff and share it. And I mean, just in this little tiny snippet, there's about 20 different conversations I feel like I could have, even within content areas, driven by this random stuff listed. And if you look, there are just astronomical scale comments here, like 857, you know, about babies not feeling pain. You know, it's just a beautiful example of the fact that even in Reddit, which is seen as, you know, often as kind of a scummy place, people are excited and passionate about learning stuff and sharing that. Here is another chunk of place, notice the VSTE plug. This is Code Academy, and the element I thought that was particularly applicable for us in education was the idea that it's teaching you how to do something by doing it, and that you can tell whether or not it worked or not instantly. That's kind of the Montessori idea that if you create the right sort of environment with the right sort of interactive pieces, it's self-correcting. You don't need a teacher to tell you you did it wrong. The materials themselves become self-reflecting. And this is Code Academy. It's getting fairly popular. I've even had my son on it. I'll throw the link in there. Oh, can it link to the VSTE website? Yeah, I think I could. You know, but the idea that you can customize and move and do things on the fly as you participate in this educational experience is pretty cool. It has badges and stuff. I don't know if that's a significant motivator for me. Maybe it is for other people, but it's kind of an interesting place to check out. But I think, like, what I'm encouraging in general is an analysis of your interactions with all these places outside of kind of formalized K-12, and you keep thinking, what makes this work, what matters, how would I make this experience better, and then how do I take all this analysis I'm doing of these other sites and bring it into the way I think about education. Here is another example that I thought was really pertinent for us as educators. Is it's Threadless.com. Anyone have Threadless clothing besides me? Hands? No? So Threadless is a community-driven site where they where they come up with design ideas for shirts, and it's created by the community, and then, you know, whoever wins essentially different design contests gets their shirt made, gets a chunk of money or whatnot. But it's just a really cool process here. You know, this idea, every product is a canvas, so it's about, you know, clothing as art, really. And then I like their progression here. Start with an idea, make it better, so an iterative process with kind of community feedback around it. You submit your design and then go do some more. You know, there's a lot of aspects of education that are, you will do this particular thing, you will submit it, and you're done. But they have this whole community, right, that's creating their own tutorials specific to this idea. You notice it's not like the teacher pouring hours, you know, or the company pouring hours into making these tutorials. It's this group. You know, people want to help other people. That's one of the fascinating aspects of, you know, I'll parallel again to DS-106, is that a lot of these tutorials may be out there or may not, but finding, sharing, or creating them is usually done in a community if the community finds value in what they're doing. So there's a reason why these things are occurring organically in these types of spaces and maybe not in our educational spaces. Because I think many times the kids don't really see a whole lot of value in what they're learning. And I'd argue in lots of cases, there's not a whole lot of value in the real world. And if you see adults who claim they can't do math, they can't spell, you see they can't write, or, you know, they fall for onion stories as news, you wonder, what are we doing educationally that's creating this result? And I think that's something we need to keep reflecting back on. This was another element of Threadless that I thought was kind of fun, is they have different ongoing themes. So I kind of thought about this in terms of a writing contest, or not even a contest, but writing in general in English. What if you had themes of different types and kids had some choice in terms of how they were going to shape and mold what they were doing here? What would that look like? How would you facilitate it? I think it's something that's attractive to people because it kind of gives them a construct that is both restrictive, but restrictive in a way that forces creativity. And I think in Threadless's case, they have kind of a wide open chunk, and then they have themed pieces that you can operate within. So it is kind of self-scaffolding. So in a non-rhetorical question, do y'all see people implementing elements of this in your school districts? Like the idea of themes or student choice in terms of the projects, and to what degree they're facilitating community around that? Yeah, so in the sidebar I see pieces of it. You know, you wonder why that isn't being done, and I'd argue part of it is because of increased standardization and increased kind of rigidity with how time is spent. It's harder to do this in today's world. Still possible, I think, but definitely harder. And here was the awesome piece that I was unaware about until I was looking at it a little more closely. Is Threadless has resources, a toolkit for teachers. And I saw that more and more. I saw that in Make Magazine, the online site. Like there's Instructables. There's a big push out there to make this accessible to teachers and applicable. And there's no question you can take these workshop materials about feedback and critique and how to score, you know, along the lines of a rubric, and apply them to things much more than design projects. You know, there's Make Magazine. I know we've hit a number of different seminars that do this sort of conversation around do-it-yourself. Beautiful community, a perfect example in my mind of the fact that people want to do things and make things and participate in this. So, you know, it's just an incredible piece across a depth and breadth of content. Karen's noticing, you know, knitting and crocheting, you know, everything from that to 3D printed guitars. So I think that's the other thing, is that it isn't technocentric. it's about achieving certain goals and making certain things. And just an incredibly powerful example of the fact that people want to do stuff. And this is Kickstarter. There are a couple elements here that I think are interesting for how you would organize this in an online community. But one is the idea of curation, right? It's kind of what I was referencing earlier. Who's being promoted on that front page and what's being promoted? You know, how do you draw attention to things you think are good and powerful so that other people can see them and kind of appreciate them? And then also kind of use them as building blocks for the way they're thinking. I also like the fact that at Kickstarter, I was contextualized automatically. So paranoia because I'm being tracked, of course, but cool that it helped kind of focus and differentiate for me. And Kickstarter, give me a hands if you're familiar. Too familiar. I'll pretend the other people are not familiar and actually heard me. So Kickstarter is an unbelievably cool thing, and I pitch this to kids all the time. It's a place to go to get funding for your dreams, essentially. So you can go there, you can say, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to make. You can fund me at different levels, and I'll give you X, Y, Z. So it's a way of circumventing the idea of banks and businesses being the ones who decide what gets made and taking it directly to the audience. And if that's not just a beautiful, beautiful thing about the internet and the scale of people you can reach, I mean, to me, it's one of the most exciting things. You can be passion-focused. You can be the person who'd be sad not to be able to do your job, in part by pitching it to a community of people like this. And just an amazingly powerful site with amazing possibilities. You know, I always thought it would be interesting to start off a school year around this type of thing. It's a lot like what Sean Cornley does at Think Funk. You know, the idea of student-created, student-based projects with competency progressions and all of that. Yeah, Jesse's right. There are a couple different ones that have started to crop up. Quirky.com apparently is one. There's a couple more. You know, Donors Choose isn't too far from it. But this being focused on kind of creative aspects, everything from, let's see, this was one, this electronic watch. I draw your attention to their $10 million of raised funds out of the $100,000 they were looking to raise. I mean, this can catch fire in some really impressive viral ways, certainly. And here we have DS106, an online MOOC that helped defray its server costs. You see they got about $8,000 more than they intended. Yeah. So really awesome that you can reach out to an audience and fund the powerful and interesting things you want to do. Never before possible. You know, that's what I stress to some 7th graders. You know, this is a unique thing capable because of the scale and scope and reach of the internet. And this was another one I really liked because the Eat More Kale guy is doing this to raise funds for a legal defense because Chick-fil-A was suing him. You know, so it's not just that. It's kind of the little person being able to stand up to corporate America and their funds. I just find that to be a really attractive idea, but that may be my anti-establishment kind of opinions coming through. But just a beautiful thing. And I think that idea of scale and publishing and who you can reach is really, you know, unique and fascinating. We need to really be thinking hard about, you know, how that works in education. This was a video I did way back when without really any thought. It was meant to be a 1-hour, you know, part of a staff development for the middle school I worked at. And I didn't even put it on YouTube. Dean Sharesky did. So this is on Dean Sharesky's YouTube account. But it's had, you know, between this and TeacherTube, it's had 1 million views. I think about that quite a bit. One, because I'm kind of embarrassed because it's cheesy and I don't really like it or believe in some of the stuff anymore. But, you know, it is part of my growth over time. But that idea that I could, as a random guy in Virginia, reach 1 million people, or at least 1 million views with my content, is just amazing. And I don't think that we take advantage of this idea of real audience or scale audience in education. So I think, Tim, you had some issues like with publicity being feared with the school newspaper. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's one of the things that's an advantage is publicity here. But can you talk a little bit about some of the fears you addressed earlier?
That wasn't mine.
Oh, sorry. You didn't have an online newspaper at a school?
Oh, that's way back. Okay. Yeah, this was that was back in the conversation before we started this.
Right.
This was an idea that one of our ITRTs had, was that, you know, students needed a safe place where they could publish ideas and people outside of the school could actually see it. But we don't like that kind of thing in our system. We don't want the students leaking out into the real world. So he put it up, and basically it's just a simple WordPress installation that he bought a URL for, and the students post things out there, but it's controlled because they're all moderated. The teachers approve things before they're seen, and the comments are moderated also. But he's afraid that if it gets too widely publicized, that IT is going to come in and tell him he has to take it down, or the school board will get upset or something like that. So he doesn't publicize it as widely as he probably should. But it all derives from fear. We seem to have a lot of fear of what students might do, of what they might say, and I come back to the part where most students, most kids are going to do what they're supposed to do. They're going to be good. They're going to be responsible. And we can probably identify who the ones that are going to push the issue, and identify them by the second week of school.
Anyone else kind of experiencing that unfortunate kind of butting up against it is powerful and good to have publicity, but at the same time fearing it? I'll assume that's a yes. What's interesting to me too as well is this is a picture of mine that ended up on Tumblr. Right? And so you'll see it's been shared about 50,000 times. It was just a snapshot. But I think Tumblr is kind of an interesting place in that I really wonder where its place is in the ecosystem. So it seems to me like the preponderance of use there is just randomly reblogging a few different people. So it's kind of frictionless thumbs up type of agreements, without a whole lot of original content being produced. I'd ask the question, do you think that matters? Feel free to grab the mic. All right, that's all the awkwardness I can take on an online presentation. I think it does. I think we need to figure out, at least to some degree, what kind of participation we want, because the kind of structures we create shape it to some degree. In the same way like writing has changed the way our society is organized, I think that there are huge swaths of changes that happen because of the tools we implement that shape the communication. Michael Wesch had a really great piece about that with some indigenous tribes in South America that were being settled, you know, and what happened to their communities as certain things were implemented, these kind of unforeseen repercussions of implementing things, like how their homes were organized and all that. I think the tools we use, be it Edimodo or WordPress, end up shaping to some degree what we do in them because they facilitate certain pathways. And so we need to be really intentional and think through a lot of stuff around that for at least what we provide at scale. And I'm not sure that we always do. I think worth thinking about a little bit, especially for y'all who are able to make those decisions. I worry about it all the time. And Tim brings up Google's 20% time. What would free time in a school look like? Because I had somebody write me last night about the hole in the wall project with the laptop and talk about installing, like, you know, I don't know if it was a joke or not, but putting computers on the playground. And my response was, I wouldn't want to constrain or, you know, kind of further dilute the very tiny amount of time people have in school for physical activity, but I would be all over some free time in the instructional day to focus on things like that. You know, well, free seems like a negative statement, Tim, but I think that that goes back into the idea that they're going to use it in a bad way, right? Kind of that kids would take free time and do evil things with it. And maybe they would in part because school is so oppressive. So I don't know. I think that's a cultural thing too, and maybe we're at such a tipping point in terms of how people perceive school, you do have to structure even free time. But I would feel bad about that. You see some of those articles on how even play, you know, the playground time is being structured in some schools, and that is probably one of the more depressing things I've ever seen. We're running down to the end here, and I am way far from the end. I think DS-106 is a beautiful thing. If you haven't checked it out, you should. I think one of the most powerful points is the student-created assignments and the student-created tutorials and the way the community is encouraged and developed by the people running the courses. So if you haven't seen DS-106 and the way kind of the work is shared out, both by people taking the real course, quote unquote, and the MOOC version of it, and the way instructors and students participate in the whole paradigm of instruction, I think it's a really beautiful and powerful thing that's worth thinking about. You know, bottom line is we have unbelievable opportunities. You know, we have young kids who are capable of unbelievable things, you know, and there are just a couple of examples noted here. Neural networks for breast cancer, 8-year-olds getting B studies published in the Royal Society Journal. We're setting a really, really low bar in education for what we want our kids to do and to be able to do and what we expect our teachers to do with these kids. And that bar is based on this lowest common denominator and lowest common expectation, and that isn't the way it should be. We live in a very strange place where raisins have QR codes and ketchup has a Facebook page, but it is an amazingly powerful place where we're getting raw information in speed and quantity that we just couldn't imagine before. And we do have these things that technology really helps us do. How do we take advantage of them in school to make this just a much better, different place with a different experience? This is the deal for me, you know, Montessori from, you know, back in the day. If we're doing this right, kids and teachers should be happy, and it should be an amazing place to be and come. And if that's not our bar, then we're really doing everyone a disservice. So I don't know if anyone has any questions or comments. I've certainly rambled on.
Anyone that wants to weigh in can just grab the mic and have their say. I think maybe
well,
being,
I will.
I was going to say maybe being right up against lunchtime is kind of discouraging people from things.
Well, and this is Karen. I'll hop in and say, Tom, thank you so much. You always give me a zillion and a half things to think about, as well as 15 new places to go and things to add to my aggregator. And your willingness to foster discussion as well is just really appreciated. My thought to the Montessori quote was, I'm reminded of educators who have said to me, why do they always think school has to be fun? Learning isn't always fun, learning's hard work and that sort of thing. And I thought maybe we're not concerned enough with the happiness of the child sometimes. So I believe you have mentioned that your slide deck is available online. Is that true at SlideShare? And if so, you can shoot me the link in email, and I'll put that up along with the recording of the session. So if if people want to go back just to look at individual slides too, they could do if you're willing to do that, and if you have the link. So I really appreciate this. I appreciate everyone who attended. I'm going to put a link in the chat